Hello everyone, what is up? It is me, Ewan from What Culture Comics, today joined by the bombastic Josh Brown.
Hello.
To talk to you today about Crisis on Infinite Earths, because the first part in the CW's epic mega crossover event dropped yesterday, and it was a bit of a doozy, and because literally no one else in the office has watched it, I've dragged Josh in here to basically interrogate me like a big dummy and basically find out all the deets in the episode and my thoughts overall.
Well, you made a really good point there by saying that I am a dummy, because I am a big Dumbo, because when it comes to sort of this show and this crossover event, I have been looking forward to it despite having no history with any of the shows really connected to it. I've never really dove into them, but I think I'm potentially an important person to be here, because the way this show has been marketed is as this sort of, it's to appeal to any sort of DC fan, any sort of superhero fan. If you like these characters, if you've liked their previous incarnations, you should be excited about this. But I don't know how that works in the context of the show, if I can just jump in, which is why I'm confused you, and I want you to talk me through its strengths, its weaknesses, whether it is for people like me, or whether I should just get away and stick to the core.
Well, Josh Brown, we're not as far from the tree as you may suspect there, because even though I have some familiarity with the Arrowverse, I watched the first season of The Flash and the first 2 seasons of Arrow as they aired, and then got really bored when they basically turned him into a big Batman knockoff, because Green Arrow is one of my favorite characters ever, and it was really not a good time. So I've kind of stayed away from then on in. I watched Constantine on the NBC series. It's pronounced Constantine, don't tell me it's not, you idiots. And then I didn't watch Legends of Tomorrow. I have watched one episode where they go to Liverpool and all these Canadian actors are trying their best Scouse accents. It's really funny.
I bet you love that one.
And there was a fear with this for me that even though I was going to jump back into it, because oh my god, the amount of cameos that they've listed off, we'll get to them in a second, has been incredible, that maybe the epic stature of Crisis would be out of the CW's kind of tiny, stunted arms, because the budgetary constraints on these shows is more noticeable, especially now after we've seen, Netflix and Amazon and, of course, Disney Plus doing their own things now. It's very limited, especially when you compare it to the sheer money that goes into superhero television these days.
Yeah, I mean, genuinely, this is why I've never really gotten into superhero shows. I remember when it was Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and that was the next big Marvel thing. I couldn't quite get into it because I just couldn't, reconcile the scope of superheroes in general and the limitations of TV, especially network TV. And I haven't watched any of these shows, but I have watched CW shows in the past. I was a big Supernatural fan.
Of course,
even on a show like that, the budget limitations were there. So how does that actually work in practice? Because this is obviously a huge storyline, like you would expect to see in a $300 million film. So how does that work on the small screen with the limitations, perhaps, of the CW?
Well, not great. It's not great. The effects in this episode are pretty bad. I know I'm going to break a lot of people's hearts here because I know a lot of people really, really love the Arrowverse shows, but I think definitely it is an issue. And obviously you can't go into a CW show expecting the world, but it is a little bit frustrating when you've got such an epic event and the enemies are always off camera or they're just CGI blobs hurtling towards the characters, and it kind of loses that epic kind of stature. They're talking about planets being destroyed and billions of people dying, and you never really get a sense for that. I'm looking for more Roland Emmerich here than Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and it only ever strays towards the latter.
I'm so used to that. Again, to bring it back to CW, there was a season of that show back in season 5 where the world was ending and it was an apocalypse that happened entirely off screen, and it didn't totally lose the drama, because I think as long as you have it rooted in character, like the stakes will follow. So do they at least have that?
And this is the thing that I really liked about this episode, is again, I've not actually been involved in the Arrowverse for 5 years now. I've jumped back in, and I had a pretty great time. It immediately sets the stage. You get a nice little synopsis from the monitor going through everything. So as someone who basically doesn't have a clue what's going on, that was pretty helpful. And then we're actually treated to loads of really, really good cameos. So Josh Brown,
come on.
One of the first planets one of the first various Earths we're introduced to is the Tim Burton versus Batman film. And I don't know if you recall, I've already forgotten the actor's name, but he was the other reporter alongside Vicky Vale who played by Kim Basinger in 1980 Batman. And he's there, and they have the Danny Elfman theme playing in the background. And then immediately afterwards, we're treated to the Earth from Titans that's on DC Universe right now. So that's confirmed to be a part of this whole thing. We also then, in the best cameo in this entire episode, get treated to what must be a modern day representation of the 60s Batman universe, and Burt Ward is out there walking Ace the Bat Hound, and then he goes, I think, what's he say? The holy crimson skies of death, and then the Earth gets destroyed, and it's absolutely wonderful, and that's kind of the cameo fan servicey thing that I'm really after with this episode.
Yes, and this is what I'm here for. I'm here for all of that stuff. What I worry, perhaps if I was a bigger fan of the shows or the CW in general, is does that come at the expense of story? Is the main appeal, like the cameo fest. Even when people were sort of, images were being released, that took the focus. I wonder how much, I don't know, how integral are those moments to the overall plot, and how do they inform each other?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably not the best person to kind of gauge that from, because I've not been invested in the show so that long, and we'll get to the big kind of spoilery thing later. Obviously, if you haven't watched the show, please just look away now, because they're going to go into every single detail there is. It is interesting because those cameos only kind of informed a partial bit of it. Everything else is still centered around the main Arrowverse characters. So you've got this version of Supergirl, Superman's Lois Lane. You've got Arrow. You've got the Atom. You've got basically all the characters. And I will have to say this as well. Katie Lotz as Sarah Lance is still far better than the CW. She is so good in this role. I think it's kind of weird that she's just acting so much better than everyone else here. But at the same time, there is that core. I imagine if you've been really invested in these shows for a long time, you will feel as though the emotional stakes are there. But yeah, basically what happens is the Monitor assembles every hero to basically kind of stop the Anti-Monitor from breaking through the universe, and it leads to this nice little kind of sequence of events where he gathers all of them up, and then we get to the big fight scene, and there are loads of these. I've already forgotten the names. I'm just going to call them putties because they're basically CGI floating putties from Mighty Morphin Power Rangers.
Let's go with it.
Yeah, and these putty Dementor type things start attacking them all, and the action is very schlocky. I will have to say this now. I sound like such an arse, but this is what it is. And through basically this unending wave of enemies, Oliver, the whole thing before Crisis was that, one of these characters is going to die now. Obviously, if you're familiar with the original Crisis on Infinite Earths comic, you'll know that both Supergirl and the Flash die in that series. And given the kind of the way the network is falling at the CW right now, it never seemed as though those characters were likely to die, because the Flash is still really popular, and obviously Supergirl is one of its biggest hits. And Stephen Amell, who of course plays Green Arrow, has been kind of stepping away from it. And we know that season 8 of Arrow will be the last, and you'll be delighted to know, Josh Brown,
I am,
that in a bid to basically save the Earth, poor old Green Arrow gets got by these Dementor putty things and dies. Now, we're obviously only in the first episode of this crossover, so there is potential for some shenanigans to come and bring him back later on. But for all intents and purposes, this first episode does end with Oliver Queen's death, and it's a thing.
I'm so pleased we issued a spoiler warning, because that there I was like, sorry, excuse me. Is this again? It's difficult to kind of talk about without knowing the rest of the shows. But for me, when it comes to kind of the big crossover events in comics themselves, I always jump into those, and I think I know when I've found a good one, when it makes me want to retroactively go back to each character's individual issues. When you were watching this and you got to that bombshell at the end, did it make you want to go back and catch it one Arrow?
No,
it
didn't.
God.
That's to me personally, because again, as someone who loves the Green Arrow character, specifically the version that we got from Dennis O'Neil and Neil Adams in the 60s, and then obviously the stuff we got with Kevin Smith and Brad Meltzer later on, this Green Arrow has never been my Green Arrow. But I imagine for people who are really invested in the character, or this version of the character, it was a pretty emotional moment. And they do loads of stuff here with his time-displaced daughter, and there's a whole passing the torch legacy moment. But I do get the feel that even though Stephen Amell is aiming for kind of a melancholic tone, it does come off kind of just being like, oh no, I'm dead now. And it's a little bit kind of awkward that way. Again, I don't want to be too negative about this, because I know loads of people love this show, and I have nothing but, I think this show makes you happy, then that's great, because it might not be my cup of tea, but I'm also enjoying different bits and bobs. I just don't particularly care about this version of Green Arrow, even though the death itself is a huge moment in terms of what Arrow has contributed towards superhero TV shows. Queen dying is a big thing. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm not 100% sure it's going to stick through to the final episode. I think there'll be some sort of thing that brings him back, and then maybe he will die again. But it was certainly a bold gambit to open it up with, kind of like their version of Infinity War, except instead of Loki being killed, it's Green Arrow. So
yeah, that's kind of it. I mean, that is a big bombshell to end the first sort of episode on, and it sort of clearly lays out that this is not just going to be a nice fan service event. There are going to be stakes, there are going to be real consequences, and like I said earlier, when you can't have the scale of a $300 million movie, when you focus on the character and consequences for these heroes that a lot of people have spent a lot of time with, that might make it worthwhile, might make it worth watching, and certainly makes it feel like an event, someone like me jumping in. It reminds me a lot, and I'm so sorry for anyone watching for this comparison, but when the Doctor Who did their big anniversary special that crossed over a lot of different
with John
Doctors.
Hurt was in it, wasn't it? Yeah.
I didn't even like Doctor Who, but I jumped into that, and it instantly understood the scale and the history behind it. And I'm hoping that's what happens with this.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely encourage everyone to go check this out. I mean, if you're a fan of DC Comics at all, you're going to love all the different winks and nods they got going. Next week, they're going to have Kevin Conroy, the voice, the most bestest Batman of all time. Even so good, he caused me to fumble that sentence. He is going to be in it as the Kingdom Come version of the character with the endoskeleton and everything, or the exoskeleton rather. So that's a whole thing going on there. I'm so excited for that. And yeah, the cameos keep coming. I'm curious to see who else gets involved. There were rumors beforehand, obviously, that maybe Linda Carter would be reprising the role as Wonder Woman in one episode. We know that Tom Welling is coming back as the Smallville version of Superman. So all these things are happening, and even though I might, sit here and poke fun at the kind of the schlockiness of the overall special effects, I still have to admire that it's actually doing this in the first place, and everyone is clearly having a fun time. I'm enjoying it, even though I think there are definite flaws. It's still entertaining.
That's it, man. There's something that I really respect about, obviously, like the CW as a network, understanding their limitations, but knowing their audience, knowing that people are just going to go for this and have a good time and have a laugh. And you might get other people, lapsed viewers, people who don't know anything about it, like me, interested in just have this kind of like celebration and this sort of big send-off for a lot of these characters. And I do secretly love that, I think.
Yeah, so we've got 4 more episodes to go. The Batwoman one happens next week, and then it goes The Flash, then Arrow, then Legends of Tomorrow, the last two in January. So yeah.
Ewan,
yeah.
What is this problem with the Batwoman one? Didn't you mention this morning?
Oh yeah, it doesn't air in the UK. No one has the rights to Batwoman in the UK, so kind of was the one I was most looking forward to. So that's it's a bit awkward. But yeah, please let us know what you thought of the first episode of Crisis on Infinite Earths down in the comments below. Were you here for all the schlockiness, or were you kind of emotionally tormented by Oliver Queen's death? Obviously, don't go out and spoil this for everyone else. That would be really bad. You can find more news, lists, and articles like this at whatculture.com/comics. You can follow me on Twitter at Ewan Things. You can follow Josh on Twitter at
Josh Broom with 2 R's.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.